Hello and welcome to Mysteries by the Fireside, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Settle in as we unravel a chilling tale from the fog-draped streets of Victorian London, narrated by Dr. John H. Watson. This is a long mystery, spanning 10 chapters and approximately 12,500 words, crafted for a complex case suitable for master detectives. Expect a sophisticated, atmospheric tone with suspense, logical deductions, red herrings, and a satisfying resolution. Chapter 1. A Disturbed Evening. Hello and welcome to Mysteries by the Fireside, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Settle in, dear listener, as we journey back to the fog-shrouded streets of Victorian London, to the familiar rooms of 221B Baker Street, where I, Dr. John H. Watson, chronicle the extraordinary cases of my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Tonight, I recount a tale of poison and betrayal, a mystery that began on a chill November evening in 1888, when the tranquility of our fireside was shattered by a desperate plea. The fog lay thick upon Baker Street, curling like a spectral serpent about the gas lamps, their feeble glow barely piercing the gloom. Inside our modest lodgings, the fire crackled in the grate, casting dancing shadows across the cluttered room. Holmes lounged in his armchair, his long fingers idle upon the neck of his violin, the instrument resting silent in his lap. His eyes, half closed, betrayed that restless intellect which, in moments of repose, seemed to smolder like embers awaiting a spark. I sat at my writing desk, pen scratching across paper, as I endeavored to record our latest adventure for the Strand magazine, though my thoughts were often interrupted by the distant clatter of hansom cabs and the mournful cry of a street vendor braving the damp. It was nearing 8 o'clock when a sharp, insistent knocking at the door broke the evening's quiet. Mrs. Hudson, our long-suffering landlady, appeared moments later, her expression a mixture of exasperation and concern. "A lady to see you, Mr. Holmes," she announced, her voice tinged with the weariness of one accustomed to late-night visits. Velvet gown slightly askew, a single glove missing, and a strand of chestnut hair escaping her bonnet. She stood hesitating in the doorway, as though unsure whether to advance or flee. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" she asked, her voice trembling, yet refined, carrying the accent of one accustomed to society's higher echelons. "And Dr. Watson, I presume?" "You have the advantage of us, madam," Holmes replied, his tone courteous, but edged with curiosity. "Pray be seated, and tell us how we may assist you." She sank into the chair I offered, her hands twisting the handkerchief, as though it were her only anchor. "My name is Lord Ashcroft," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Miss Eleanor Ashcroft, sister to Lord Henry Ashcroft of Ashcroft Manor. I come to you in desperation, for my brother is dead, murdered, I am certain, at his own banquet last night. The police are at a loss, and I fear the culprit will escape justice unless you intervene." Holmes leaned forward, his sharp features illuminated by the fire's glow, his eyes gleaming with that intensity which I knew signaled a mind fully engaged. "Murder, you say? A serious charge, Miss Ashcroft. Begin at the beginning, and omit no detail, however trivial it may seem. The smallest thread may unravel the tapestry of a crime." Miss Ashcroft drew a shuddering breath, her hands stilling momentarily as she gathered her thoughts. "My brother, Lord Henry, was a man of considerable wealth and influence, known for his generosity and his love of society. Last night he hosted a banquet at our family estate in Kensington, a grand affair to celebrate a recent business triumph. 12 guests were in attendance, men and women of note, including his business partner, Mr. Reginald Thorne, his cousin, Lady Beatrice Ashcroft, a diplomat named Sir Charles Vane, and a widow, Mrs. Clara Morton, among others. The evening proceeded with all the elegance one would expect: fine food, sparkling conversation, and a toast to my brother's success. Her voice faltered, and she pressed the handkerchief to her lips. I offered her a glass of brandy from the decanter on the sideboard, which she accepted with a grateful nod. After a sip, "There any who bore your brother ill will? Any hint of enmity or motive?" She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. Henry was not without enemies, though he was loath to admit it. His wealth and influence attracted envy, and his recent business ventures had stirred discontent. Mr. Thorne, his partner, had argued with him over investments, though I know not the details. Lady Beatrice, our cousin, had a falling out with Henry over the family estate, believing she was entitled to a greater share. Sir Charles Vane, the diplomat, seemed agitated during the evening, though I cannot say why. And Mrs. Morton, her manner was strange, almost too mournful, as though she anticipated grief. Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile, though whether from amusement or satisfaction I could not tell. And the servants? The preparation of the port, the arrangement of the glasses, any irregularities? The servants are loyal, many with us for years, Miss Ashcroft replied, though a flicker of doubt crossed her face. The butler, Mr. Harrow, oversaw the decanting of the port, and the footmen served it. I saw nothing amiss, but the police have questioned them all and found no answers. Holmes rose abruptly, pacing before the fire, his silhouette stark against the flickering light. "The poison was administered with precision, Watson," he said, addressing me, though his eyes remained fixed on some invisible point. "A glass of port shared by all, yet fatal to one. The method is bold, the execution meticulous. We must see the scene of the crime, Miss Ashcroft. Tomorrow, at first light, we shall visit Ashcroft Manor. Bring the seating chart if you have it, and any details of the banquet's arrangements." Miss Ashcroft nodded, her relief palpable. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I knew you were my only hope. The police believe it an accident, or worse, a suicide. But I know my brother. He was full of life, planning for the future. Someone took him from us, and I will not rest until they are brought to justice." "We shall do our utmost," I assured her, moved by her distress. "Rest tonight, Miss Ashcroft, and leave the matter in Holmes's hands." She rose, her composure restored, though her eyes still glistened with unshed tears. "I shall Suspicions premature, Watson. We have facts, but not enough. The metallic odor Miss Ashcroft mentioned. Did she imagine it, or is it a clue? The guests' motives, the servants' access, the timing of the poison, all must be examined. For now, we rest. A clear mind is our greatest weapon." As the fire dwindled, I gazed out at the fog pressing against the window. A fitting metaphor for the mystery before us. Somewhere in that murky veil lay the truth, and I had no doubt that Sherlock Holmes would pierce it with his unerring logic. Chapter 2. The Scene of the Banquet. Hello, and welcome to Mysteries by the Fireside, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. I, Dr. John H. Watson, continue our tale of murder and intrigue in the fog-laden streets of Victorian London. This morning, November 1888, found Sherlock Holmes and myself rattling through the city in a hansom cab, bound for Ashcroft Manor to investigate the mysterious death of Lord Henry Ashcroft. The chill air and the promise of a complex puzzle set my heart racing, for I knew Holmes was already weaving the threads of this case in his extraordinary mind. The fog, though lighter than the previous evening, still clung to London like a persistent ghost, wreathing the gas lamps in a sickly glow. Our cab clattered over cobblestones, the hooves of the horse echoing in the muffled quiet of Kensington's grand avenues. Miss Eleanor Ashcroft had sent her carriage as promised, and we found her awaiting us at the manor's gates, her black-clad figure stark against the ivy-draped stone walls. Her face, pale beneath her veil, bore the weight of grief. Yet her eyes held a flicker of hope as she greeted us. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank you for coming," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "The banquet hall remains as it was, per your instructions. The police have cordoned it off, but they've made little progress." Holmes nodded, his gaze already sweeping the surroundings. "Excellent, Miss Ashcroft. Lead us to the scene, and provide the gleamed with silver and crystal, the remnants of the feast untouched, save for the faint dust of police chalk." At the head of the table stood Lord Ashcroft's chair, its high back carved with the family crest, now a silent witness to his demise. The port decanter, half full of ruby liquid, sat at the table's center, surrounded by glasses, some still bearing traces of the fatal drink. Holmes moved with the precision of a predator, his long coat trailing as he circled the table. His magnifying lens glinted in the light of the chandelier, which cast a ghostly glow over the scene. "Watson, observe the arrangement," he said, his voice low but resonant. Lord Ashcroft sat here, at the head. To his right, Mr. Reginald Thorne, his business partner. To his left, Lady Beatrice Ashcroft, his cousin. Opposite, Sir Charles Vane, the diplomat, and Mrs. Clara Morton, the widow. The other guests radiated outward, their positions meticulously recorded in Miss Ashcroft's chart. I studied the diagram she handed us, a neatly penned sketch of the table, with names at each seat. The guests included a banker, Mr. Edward Langston, a young heiress, Miss Sophia Harrow, a retired colonel, Sir William Grant, and several others of London's elite. Each name was a potential suspect, their motives obscured by the fog of the case. Holmes knelt beside Lord Ashcroft's chair, his lens hovering over the tablecloth. "The glass," he murmured, lifting the crystal goblet that had held the poisoned port. He tilted it, noting the faint residue clinging to its interior. Bringing it to his nose, he inhaled deeply, his brow furrowing. "A metallic odor, Watson, as Miss Ashcroft described. Not the port itself, but something else, something subtle yet distinct." I leaned closer, catching a faint whiff of something acrid, unlike the rich bouquet of port. "Poison, Holmes. But how could it affect only one glass when all drank from the same decanter?" "Precisely the question," he replied, his eyes caused a brief commotion. Servants rushed to clean it, and the guests' attention was diverted. "But surely that was an accident." "Accidents, Miss Ashcroft, are often the cloak of design," Holmes said, moving to examine the candelabra at the table's center. Wax had dripped onto the cloth, forming irregular pools. He scraped a sample with his penknife, slipping it into an envelope. "Wax can conceal much, Watson. A drop of poison, perhaps, disguised as a careless spill?" I marveled at his imagination, though I knew it was grounded in logic. "But the poison, Holmes, how could it be so precise? Arsenic, you suspect?" "Possibly," he replied, his attention now on the decanter. He lifted it, swirling the liquid within. "The port itself is untainted, or others would have fallen ill. The poison was in the glass, introduced either before or during the banquet. We must consider the sequence. The glasses were set, the port poured, the toast raised. Somewhere in that chain lies the murderer's hand." We moved to the sideboard, where the remaining glasses stood in a neat row. Holmes examined each, noting their positions relative to the decanter. "The footman served from this sideboard," he said, pointing to the polished surface. "The glasses were distributed after the pour, yes?" Miss Ashcroft nodded. "Mr. Harrow poured the port, and the footman carried the glasses to the guests. I saw nothing unusual, but I was seated at the far end, distracted by conversation." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "And who was near the sideboard during the commotion caused by Miss Harrow's spill?" She hesitated, a brow creasing. I cannot be certain. Mr. Thorne was nearby, I think, adjusting his chair. Mrs. Morton, too, had risen to assist Miss Harrow. Sir Charles was pacing, as he often does when agitated. "I'm sorry, Mr. Holmes, it all happened so quickly." "No matter," Holmes said, his tone reassuring but his eyes alight with calculation. "The scene speaks for itself. Watson, note the tablecloth, there, near Lord Ashcroft's place. A faint stain, not wine, but something else. Ink, perhaps? Or a chemical residue?" I peered at the spot, a barely discernible. "Please, find who did this to my brother." "We shall," I assured her, though my mind was already tangled in the web of clues. Holmes, however, seemed invigorated, his step light as we boarded the cab back to Baker Street. "Watson," he said as the cab rattled through the fog, "this is no crude crime. The poisoner is clever, calculating, and bold. The metallic odor, the stained tablecloth, the distraction of the spilled wine, all pieces of a puzzle. Tomorrow, we interview the guests. Their words will betray their hearts." I nodded, my thoughts swirling like the mist outside. Ashcroft Manor, with its grandeur and tragedy, had yielded its first secrets, but many more lay hidden in the fog. Chapter 3. The Guests and Their Secrets. Hello, and welcome to Mysteries by the Fireside, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. I, Dr. John H. Watson, continue our journey through the fog-bound mystery of Lord Henry Ashcroft's death, poisoned at his own banquet in the opulent halls of Ashcroft Manor. It was the afternoon of November 1888, and Sherlock Holmes and I had returned to the manor to interview the guests, each a potential thread in the intricate tapestry of this crime. The fog pressed against the tall windows, muffling the world beyond, as we stepped into the drawing room, where secrets and suspicions hung as thick as the London mist. The drawing room was a study in Victorian grandeur, its walls adorned with crimson damask and gilt-framed portraits. A fire roared in the marble hearth, casting flickering shadows across the faces of the assembled guests. The air was heavy with the scent of beeswax polish and the faint perfume of lavender, though it did little to mask the tension that crackled like static. Miss Eleanor Ashcroft had arranged for the principal guests to gather, and they sat in a semicircle of velvet-upholstered chairs, their expressions ranging from guarded to openly hostile. Holmes stood by the mantel, his lean figure framed by the firelight, his eyes scanning each face with the precision of a hawk. "Gentlemen, ladies," Holmes began, his voice calm yet commanding, "I am Sherlock Holmes, and this—"
"Thorne, I understand you and Lord Ashcroft disagreed over this venture. Was there tension between you?" Thorne's jaw tightened, a flush creeping up his neck. "Business disagreements are common, sir. Henry wished to expand too quickly, risking our capital. I urged caution, but we resolved it amicably. I had no reason to wish him harm. Our fortunes were tied together." Holmes nodded, though his eyes betrayed no satisfaction. "And the toast, Mr. Thorne? Were you near the sideboard when the port was served?" I may have been," Thorne stammered, his fingers drumming on his knee. "I adjusted my chair after Miss Harrow's spill, but I was focused on the conversation, not the glasses." I jotted notes in my pocketbook, noting Thorne's unease. Holmes turned to Lady Beatrice Ashcroft, a woman of striking elegance, her auburn hair swept into a severe chignon, her emerald gown accentuating her cold, imperious demeanor. She sat with the poise of royalty, her gloved hands folded in her lap. "Lady Beatrice," Holmes said, "Miss Ashcroft mentioned a family dispute over the estate. Pray, enlighten us." Her lips pursed, and she fixed Holmes with a haughty glare. "A trifling matter, Mr. Holmes. Henry and I disagreed on the disposition of certain properties. As his cousin, I felt entitled to a share of the Ashcroft holdings, given my father's contributions to the family fortune. Henry was stubborn, but we were on speaking terms. I was seated beside him at the banquet, and I saw nothing amiss until he fell." "Yet you were close enough to tamper with his glass," Holmes said, his tone neutral but probing. Her eyes flashed. "I resent the implications, sir. I am a lady of honor, not a poisoner." Holmes inclined his head, unmoved, and turned to Sir Charles Vane, the diplomat, a tall man with a hawkish nose and a restless energy. He paced near the window, his cane tapping the floor rhythmically. "Sir Charles," Holmes said, "you appeared agitated during the banquet. Was there a reason?" Sir Charles halted, his grip tightening on his cane. "Agitated? Perhaps. I had received troubling news."
Observe. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "It was a dreadful night, Mr. Holmes. Henry was so lively, so charming. When Miss Harrow spilled her wine, I rose to assist, as did others. I saw nothing of the port or the glasses. My attention was on poor Sophia. When Henry fell, I was heartbroken. He was a dear friend." Holmes studied her, his expression inscrutable. "A friend, you say? Yet some friendships conceal deeper motives. Were you aware of Lord Ashcroft's business dealings with your late husband?" Mrs. Morton's hand froze mid-dab, her eyes widening briefly before she composed herself. "My husband's affairs were complex, Mr. Holmes. Henry was kind enough to offer support after my loss, but I know little of their business." Holmes nodded, though I sensed he was far from satisfied. He questioned the remaining guests briefly: Mr. Langston, the banker, who claimed ignorance of any foul play; Miss Harrow, who blushed and stammered about her clumsiness; and Sir William Grant, the retired colonel, who gruffly dismissed the idea of poison as poppycock. Each offered little beyond what Miss Ashcroft had told us, yet their mannerisms spoke volumes. Thorne's defensiveness, Lady Beatrice's hauteur, Sir Charles's evasion, and Mrs. Morton's calculated grief. As the interviews concluded, Holmes drew me aside, his voice low. "Watson, each guest wears a mask, but their secrets are written in their gestures. Thorne's nervousness suggests financial strain. Lady Beatrice's pride hides resentment. Sir Charles's pacing betrays a guilty conscience, or perhaps fear. And Mrs. Morton, her tears are too perfect, her sorrow too rehearsed." I nodded, my mind grappling with the web of motives. "But who had the opportunity, Holmes? The port was poured openly, the glasses distributed. Could a servant have acted?" "Possible, but unlikely," he replied, glancing at the butler, Mr. Harrow, who stood discreetly by the door. "The butler's loyalty is vouched for, but loyalty can be bought. The footman James bears watching. His devotion to Lord Ashcroft may conceal a grudge. We must examine their statements against the physical evidence." Miss Ashcroft approached. Beatrice's inheritance quarrel, Sir Charles's diplomatic troubles, Mrs. Morton's ambiguous grief, each was a thread. But which led to the murderer? At Baker Street, Holmes lit his pipe, the smoke curling towards the ceiling as he paced before the fire. "Watson, the banquet hall gave us clues. The metallic odor, the stained tablecloth, the distraction of the spilled wine.
Now, the guests have added their secrets. The poison was in Lord Ashcroft's glass, but the hand that placed it there moved in the shadows of that commotion. Tomorrow we test the chemical residue and pursue the servant angle. The fog of this case is thick, but it will clear. I gazed out at the gas-lit street, the fog a fitting mirror for the mystery. Holmes's logic was my guide, yet I could not shake the sense that we were only beginning to unravel the web of deceit spun at Ashcroft Manor. Chapter 4. The Curious Case of the Port. Hello, and welcome to Mysteries by the Fireside, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. I, Dr. John H. Watson, resume our tale of murder most foul in the fog-shrouded streets of Victorian London, November 1888. After a morning spent probing the secrets of Lord Ashcroft's banquet guests, Sherlock Holmes and I returned to the familiar confines of 221B Baker Street, where the fire crackled and the air was thick with the promise of revelation. The port decanter, its ruby contents laced with death, held the key to this mystery, and Holmes was determined to unlock its secrets through the unerring lens of science. The fog outside our windows had thickened, pressing against the panes like a living thing, its tendrils curling in the dim glow of the gas lamps. Inside, the sitting room was a haven of warmth, though cluttered with the tools of Holmes's trade. Chemical apparatus cluttered the table, vials and burners casting eerie reflections in the firelight. Holmes stood at his workbench, his long fingers deftly arranging test tubes and pipettes, his face illuminated by the soft glow of a Bunsen burner. The samples from Ashcroft Manor, the residue from Lord Ashcroft's glass, the stained oxide, subtle yet deadly. Let us test the residue first. He decanted a small portion of the residue into a test tube, adding a solution of nitric acid. The liquid fizzed gently, and Holmes's lips curved in a faint smile. Observe, Watson, the formation of a yellow precipitate. Marsh's test will confirm it. He prepared a small apparatus, heating the sample over the burner and passing the resulting gas through a glass tube. A metallic mirror formed on the tube's interior, glinting in the firelight. Arsenic, Holmes declared, his tone triumphant. The poison was indeed arsenious oxide, administered in a minute quantity, enough to kill one man, but not to taint the decanter's contents. The other glasses bore no such residue, confirming the poison was in Lord Ashcroft's glass alone. I leaned forward, fascinated yet perplexed. But how, Holmes? The port was poured from a single decanter, served by the footman. Could the poison have been in the glass before the pour? A plausible theory, he replied, setting the tube aside and turning to the stained tablecloth. The glass itself may have been coated with a solution of arsenic, dried to leave an invisible film. When the port was poured, the poison dissolved, undetected by taste or smell. Alternatively, it was added during the banquet, in the chaos of Miss Harrow's spilled wine. He examined the tablecloth sample under his lens, scraping the faint smudge into a dish. This stain, Watson, is not ink, as I initially suspected, but a chemical residue, possibly a carrier for the arsenic. It suggests proximity to the act of poisoning. Let us test it. He dissolved the sample in distilled water, adding reagents with practiced precision. The solution turned a pale green, and Holmes nodded. A trace of copper, likely from a compound used to stabilize the arsenic. This is no amateur's work, Watson. The poisoner possessed knowledge of chemistry and access to such substances. I frowned, my mind racing through the guests we had interviewed. Mr. Thorne, perhaps? His business dealings might give him access to chemicals. Or Sir Charles Vane. Diplomats often deal in intrigue, and he was near the sideboard. Holmes shook his head during the commotion. A clever poisoner might use such a distraction to drop a pellet of arsenic into the glass. I recalled the banquet hall, its opulent table set with crystal and silver, the chandelier casting a ghostly glow. The footman Holmes, could one have been bribed? Miss Ashcroft vouched for their loyalty, but the young footman, James, seemed devoted to Lord Ashcroft. Devotion can mask betrayal. Holmes's eyes narrowed, and he paused, his pipe halfway to his lips. An astute observation, Watson. The footman's role in serving the port is critical. If he was bribed or coerced, he could have ensured the poisoned glass reached Lord Ashcroft. We must question him further, but discreetly. For now, the chemical evidence points to a calculated act, not a servant's blunder. He paced before the fire, his silhouette stark against the flickering light. Consider the sequence, Watson. The glasses were set by the butler, Mr. Harrow, and filled from the decanter. The footman distributed them. Miss Harrow's spill occurred just before the toast, drawing eyes away from the table. In that moment, someone, guest or servant, could have tampered with Lord Ashcroft's glass. The metallic odor suggests a compound prepared in advance, perhaps disguised as a harmless substance. I scribbled notes, struggling to keep pace with his reasoning. But who among the guests had the knowledge? Mrs. Morton, perhaps? Her late husband's business ties to Lord Ashcroft might have given her access to such compounds. Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. Mrs. Morton's tears are a performance, Watson. But her knowledge of chemistry is unproven. Sir Charles's agitation suggests a secret. But diplomats are not typically chemists. Thorne's business ventures may involve industrial compounds, and Lady Beatrice's pride could mask a deeper cunning. Yet we lack the link, opportunity, and method. He returned to his workbench, examining the residue once more. The arsenic was likely dissolved in a solvent, perhaps alcohol, to create a colorless solution. A small vial, concealed in a pocket or sleeve, could have been emptied into the glass during the distraction. The copper trace in the tablecloth stain suggests a stabilized chemist's shop, perhaps, or a private laboratory. Tomorrow, we pursue the footman's testimony and investigate the service entrance, where the cloaked figure was seen. As the fire dwindled, I gazed out at the fog, its density a mirror for the case's opacity. Holmes's chemical tests had confirmed the poison, but the hand that wielded it remained elusive. The banquet hall, with its glittering table and hidden stains, seemed a stage for a deadly performance, and I trusted Holmes to unmask the culprit. "Watson," he said, breaking the silence, "this case is a symphony of misdirection. The metallic odor, the copper trace, the spilled wine, all are notes in a composition of murder. We shall play it to its conclusion." I nodded, my thoughts heavy with the weight of the mystery. The port, once a symbol of celebration, had become an instrument of death, and only Holmes's relentless logic could pierce the fog that concealed the truth. Helv, and welcome to Mysteries by the Fireside, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. I, Dr. John H. Watson, continue our tale of murder and mystery in the fog-draped streets of Victorian London, November 1888. The evening had fallen, and Sherlock Holmes, armed with the chemical confirmation of arsenic in Lord Ashcroft's glass, now turned his relentless mind to a new lead, a cloaked figure seen near the service entrance of Ashcroft Manor on the night of the banquet. As the gas lamps flickered through the mist, we ventured into the labyrinthine alleys of London, pursuing a shadow that might hold the key to this deadly puzzle. The fog was a palpable presence, thicker than it had been all day, swallowing the city in a shroud that muffled sound and blurred sight. The air was damp and cold, carrying the acrid tang of coal smoke and the faint whiff of the Thames. Holmes and I, cloaked against the chill, stepped from our hansom cab at the edge of Kensington, where the grand avenues gave way to narrower, less savory streets. The lead had come from the young footman, James, who had mentioned in passing a cloaked figure lingering near the manor.
Watson. But the figure's presence at the service entrance implies knowledge of the manor's layout. A guest would risk detection, a stranger less so. We seek a chemist who sold arsenic, likely under the table. The monogrammed glove we may find will tell us more. The streets of Whitechapel were a stark contrast to the opulence of Ashcroft Manor. Here, the gas lamps were fewer, their light struggling against the fog. Shadows moved in doorways, and the distant cry of a street hawker pierced the silence. Our destination was a dingy shop tucked between a pawnshop and a public house, its sign reading H. Grimsby, Apothecary. The window was grimy, displaying faded bottles of laudanum and patent medicines. But Holmes's sources, his network of informants, from cabbies to urchins, had pointed to Grimsby as a purveyor of less reputable substances. We entered, the bell above the door jangling discordantly. The shop was cramped, its shelves lined with jars of powders and liquids, the air heavy with the scent of herbs and chemicals. Behind the counter stood a wiry man with a pinched face and spectacles perched on a sharp nose, Mr. Grimsby himself. He eyed us warily, his hands fidgeting with a mortar and pestle. "Good evening," Holmes said, his tone deceptively genial. "We seek information regarding a recent purchase of arsenious oxide, a small quantity, likely sold discreetly." Grimsby's eyes narrowed, and he set the pestle down with a clink. "I run a respectable business, sir. I sell no poisons without a prescription, and I keep meticulous records." Holmes leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Come, Mr. Grimsby, let us dispense with pretense. A man of your trade knows the value of discretion, and the profit in it. A cloaked figure, perhaps a gentleman, purchased arsenic within the past week. Speak, and we shall trouble you no further." The chemist's composure faltered, his fingers twitching. I cannot say. Many come and go. I don't pry into their business." Holmes's voice dropped, cold as the fog outside. "You will find, Mr. Grimsby, that Scotland Yard is less patient than I. A word from me, and your shop will be searched, your records—" "None I could place," Grimsby replied. He was careful, kept his words few. We left the shop, the fog swallowing us once more. Holmes's pace quickened, his eyes scanning the alleyways. "A gentleman with a crested ring, Watson. This narrows our field. Sir Charles Vane, perhaps, or Mr. Thorne, both men of status. But the trembling hands suggest fear or desperation. We must find this figure." As we turned into a narrower alley, the fog grew denser, the gas lamps mere pinpricks of light. A sudden movement caught my eye, a cloaked shape darting around a corner. "Holmes," I whispered, pointing. He nodded, his hand on my arm. "After him, Watson, but quietly. We must not lose him." We pursued, our footsteps muffled by the fog, the cobblestones slick underfoot. The figure moved swiftly, weaving through the maze of alleys, his cloak billowing like a phantom's shroud. The chase led us deeper into Whitechapel, past shuttered shops and derelict tenements, the air thick with the stench of refuse. My heart pounded, the thrill of the hunt tempered by the eerie silence of the fog. The figure turned into a dead-end alley, its walls looming like sentinels. We slowed, Holmes's hand raised for caution. As we approached, a glint on the ground caught his eye, a glove, monogrammed with a single letter. V. He picked it up, examining it under the faint light of a distant lamp. "Sir Charles Vane," I whispered, my breath visible in the cold. "Or a deliberate misdirection?" Holmes's eyes narrowed, his fingers tracing the monogram.
The glove is fine leather, Watson, befitting a diplomat, but its placement here, so conveniently found, smells of a trap. The poisoner is clever, weaving red herrings into the fabric of the crime. I scanned the alley, my revolver at the ready, but the figure had vanished, swallowed by the fog. He's gone, Holmes. How did he know we were following? Perhaps he didn't, Holmes mused, pocketing the glove. This may be a lure, left to divert us. Sir Charles is a convenient suspect. His agitation, his pacing near the sideboard. Yet the trembling hands described by Grimsby, familiarity with the manner. An outsider would need guidance, a guest or servant as accomplice. Tomorrow we question the footman, James, and investigate the manor's staff. The glove is a clue, but not the answer. The fog hides much, but it cannot conceal the truth forever. As the fire crackled, I gazed out at the shrouded street, the gas lamp's faint beacons in the mist. The chase had yielded a tantalizing clue, but the shadow we pursued remained elusive, a phantom in the fog of this deadly mystery. Chapter 6. The Servant's Testimony. Hello, and welcome to Mysteries by the Fireside, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. I, Dr. John H. Watson, continue our tale of intrigue and murder in the fog-shrouded streets of Victorian London, November 1888. The pursuit of a cloaked figure through Whitechapel's alleys had yielded a tantalizing clue, a monogrammed glove bearing the letter V. But Sherlock Holmes remained skeptical, suspecting a deliberate misdirection. Now, as evening settled over Ashcroft Manor, we returned to question the young footman, James, whose fleeting mention of the mysterious figure had set us on that nocturnal chase. The manor's grandeur seemed to loom larger in the dusk, its secrets hidden in the shadows cast by flickering gaslight. The fog had relented slightly, allowing the last rays of a sullen sunset to pierce the mist, casting a pale glow over the manor's stone facade. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of polish and the faint mustiness of old wealth. Miss Eleanor Ashcroft greeted us in the entrance hall, her face drawn with anxiety. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice low. "I've arranged for James to meet you in the servants' quarters. He's been nervous since the banquet, and I fear he knows more than he's told." Holmes's eyes gleamed with that familiar intensity. "Excellent, Miss Ashcroft. A nervous servant is often a key to unlocking a mystery. Lead us to him, and ensure we are not disturbed." We followed her through a maze of corridors, descending a narrow staircase. Someone, a tall figure, cloaked, near the service door. They moved quick-like into the fog. I didn't think much of it then, but after his lordship died. Holmes leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "You thought it significant enough to mention, yet you omitted details. The figure's height, their gait, any sound they made. Speak, man." James's hands trembled, and he glanced at the door as though expecting rescue. "Tall, sir, like I said. Slender, maybe. They didn't walk heavy, more careful, like they didn't want to be heard. I heard a rustle, like cloth, and maybe a clink, metal, I think. That's all, I swear." I noted his unease, my pencil scratching in my pocketbook. Holmes's voice grew softer, almost hypnotic. "And you saw this figure during the commotion of Miss Harrow's spilled wine, yes? Were you near the banquet hall then?" James nodded, his eyes wide. "Aye, sir. I was in the corridor, near the sideboard, when Miss Harrow's glass tipped over. Everyone was fussing, servants cleaning, guests talking. I went to the pantry after, and that's when I saw the figure." Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. "And during this fuss, did you see anyone near Lord Ashcroft's glass? Any guest or servant lingering by the table?" James's face flushed, and he hesitated, his cap now a crumpled mass in his hands. I saw Sir Charles Vane, sir. He was near the sideboard, pacing, like he does. I thought he was just restless, but he was close to the decanter, maybe the glasses, too. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Sir Charles, you say? And no one else? Think carefully, James. Your master's murderer depends on your honesty. The footman's voice cracked, and he looked away, his shoulders hunching. I don't know, sir. It was all so quick. Mrs. Morton was there, too, helping Miss Harrow, and Mr. Thorne was fixing his chair. I didn't see nothing clear, honest. Holmes stepped closer, his presence commanding. James, you are withholding something. Your hands tremble, your eyes avoid mine. Speak the truth, or I shall deduce it, and you will not like the consequences. The young man's composure broke, and he sank onto a chair, his face in his hands. All right.
Name. Just the coin and the order. Holmes exchanged a glance with me, and I knew he was thinking of the chemist's description from Whitechapel. A crested ring, he murmured. And what did he say? Precisely. James's eyes darted to the floor. He said, If anyone asks about the banquet, say Sir Charles was near the sideboard, acting suspicious. Told me to mention the cloaked figure, too, to make it seem real. I didn't know it was about murder, sir. I swear it. Holmes's tone softened, but his gaze remained unrelenting. And you told no one else of this? Not Miss Ashcroft? Not the butler? No, sir, James said, his voice breaking. I was ashamed. Lord Ashcroft was good to me, and now he's gone. I didn't mean no harm. Holmes stepped back, his expression inscrutable. You have done harm, James. But you may yet redeem yourself. Say nothing of this to anyone, not the police, not the other servants. We shall handle the matter. James nodded, tears streaking his face. Miss Ashcroft, who had been listening silently from the doorway, stepped forward, her expression a mix of shock and pity. James, how could you? She whispered. My brother trusted you. I'm sorry, miss, he mumbled, unable to meet her eyes. Holmes turned to her. Miss Ashcroft, in short, James remains in your employ for now. He may yet be useful. We must return to Baker Street to analyze this new thread. As we left the servants' quarters, the manor's corridor seemed darker, the gas lamps casting flickering shadows that mirrored the shifting truths of the case. The cab ride back to 221B was silent, Holmes lost in thought, his fingers tapping a rhythm on the monogrammed glove in his pocket. I reviewed my notes, the footman's confession swirling in my mind. A bribed servant, a cloaked figure, a crested ring. The pieces were falling into place, yet the puzzle remained incomplete. At Baker Street, the fire was a welcome refuge from the damp chill of the evening. Holmes lit his pipe, the smoke curling like the fog outside. Watson, he said, pacing before the hearth, James's testimony is a pivot. The bribe points to a calculated effort to frame Sir Charles Vane.
V is a clumsy attempt to implicate Sir Charles, but the ring suggests a deeper player. The trembling hands noted by the chemist and James's fear suggest a man under pressure, perhaps coerced or desperate. I gazed out at the fog, the gas lamps faint beacons in the mist. Holmes, this case grows more tangled. The footman's lie, the cloaked figure. Could an outsider have orchestrated this? Possible, Holmes said, pausing at a page of crests. But the service entrance suggests knowledge of the manor's routine. An insider, guest or servant, is involved. Tomorrow, we pursue the ring's crest and question the butler, Mr. Harrow. His oversight of the port service may hide a lapse or complicity. As the fire dwindled, I felt the weight of the mystery, its threads weaving a web of deceit. James's confession had cracked open a door, but the truth remained shrouded in the fog of Ashcroft Manor. Chapter 7. The Red Herring Unraveled. Hello and welcome to Mysteries by the Fireside, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. I, Dr. John H. Watson, continue our tale of murder and deception in the fog-laden streets of Victorian London, November 1888. The confession of the young footman, James, had cast a new light on the poisoning of Lord Henry Ashcroft, revealing a calculated attempt to frame Sir Charles Vane with a monogrammed glove and a bribed testimony. Sherlock Holmes, undeterred by this web of misdirection, now paced the familiar confines of 221B Baker Street, his mind dissecting the threads of the case as we sought to unravel the red herring and draw closer to the truth. The fog outside our windows had thickened once more, cloaking Baker Street in a spectral haze that mirrored the opacity of the mystery. Inside, the fire crackled, casting flickering shadows across the cluttered room, where papers, chemical vials, and the monogrammed glove lay scattered on the table. Holmes stood before the hearth, his pipe sending curls of smoke toward the ceiling, his lean figure taut with the energy of a mind fully engaged. The glove, with its bold V, seemed to taunt us, a deliberate clue designed.
The arsenic was in Lord Ashcroft's glass, introduced during the distraction of Miss Harrow's spilled wine. The footman was bribed to implicate Sir Charles, and the glove, conveniently dropped in Whitechapel, bears his initial. Yet Sir Charles wears no crested ring, and his demeanour, while nervous, lacks the cunning of a poisoner. He moved to the table, retrieving the seating chart from Ashcroft Manor. Consider the banquet, Watson. The guests were positioned thus: Thorn to Ashcroft's right, Lady Beatrice to his left, Sir Charles and Mrs. Morton opposite. The sideboard, where the port glasses were prepared, was accessible to all during the commotion. But Mrs. Morton's proximity to the table and her role in assisting Miss Harrow places her in a position of opportunity. I frowned, recalling her delicate tears and rehearsed grief. Mrs. Morton, Holmes. Her husband's debts to Ashcroft's business could be motive, but would she have the knowledge to procure arsenic? Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. Precisely the question, Watson. Her late husband, a merchant, dealt in chemicals for trade, possibly including arsenic compounds. Her grief, I suspect, masks calculation. Let us test this hypothesis. He turned to his chemical apparatus, where the samples from the banquet hall, the tablecloth stain and the wax drippings, awaited further analysis. The copper trace in the tablecloth stain suggests a stabilizing agent for the arsenic, a detail not easily overlooked. Mrs. Morton's background may include access to such compounds, perhaps through her husband's contacts. I watched as he dissolved another portion of the tablecloth sample, the solution turning a faint green under the Bunsen burner's flame. "The copper is consistent," he murmured, "but the quantity is minute, suggesting a spill or residue from the poison's delivery. The wax, however, is clean. No trace of poison. It was a distraction, not a tool." I scribbled notes, my mind grappling with the complexity. So the spill of Miss Harrow's wine was orchestrated by Mrs. Morton to create a moment for poisoning. Holmes nodded, pacing once more. Likely, Watson. The spilled wine drew eyes away from the table, allowing a deft hand to tamper with Lord Ashcroft's glass. Mrs. Morton, under the guise of an accomplice outside the manor, perhaps? The cloaked figure at the service entrance? Precisely, Holmes said, retrieving the heraldic tome from his shelf. The crested ring is our link. I have identified a possible match, a crest belonging to a minor noble family, the Haverfords, known in trade circles. Mrs. Morton's late husband was associated with their firm, which dealt in industrial chemicals. The ring may belong to a surviving member or an agent acting on her behalf. He flipped through the tome, pausing at an illustration of a crest, a falcon clutching a scroll. This matches the chemist's description. A gold ring, likely worn by a man of status. We must trace this Haverford connection, but first we debunk the red herring of Sir Charles. Holmes sat, his pipe forgotten, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Sir Charles's agitation stems from a diplomatic scandal,
A leaked memorandum, perhaps, unrelated to Ashcroft's death. The glove was planted to exploit his vulnerability, but its lever is too new, its monogram too bold. A true murderer would not leave such an obvious clue. I nodded, recalling Sir Charles's restless pacing and nervous demeanour. So the glove was dropped deliberately in Whitechapel to lead us astray. Indeed, Holmes said. The cloaked figure we pursued was likely the briber, aware of our investigation. He dropped the glove to reinforce James's false testimony. But the ring, Watson, the ring is no red herring. It ties the arsenic's source to the manor, and Mrs. Morton is our strongest thread. He rose, retrieving a map of London from his desk. The service entrance at Ashcroft Manor is accessible via a lane behind the gardens. The cloaked figure's presence there suggests knowledge of the household's routine. Mrs. Morton, as a frequent guest, would know the manor's layout. Her accomplice, perhaps a Haverford agent, could have entered to deliver the poison or instructions. I frowned, the pieces shifting in my mind. But why frame Sir Charles, Holmes? Why not Thorne or Lady Beatrice, who also had motives? Holmes's eyes gleamed. Sir Charles is a convenient scapegoat. His diplomatic troubles make him a believable suspect, and his pacing discreet inspection with Miss Ashcroft's aid. As he spoke, the fog outside seemed to press closer, its tendrils curling against the window panes. The fire's warmth did little to dispel the chill of the case, its complexity a labyrinth of lies. Holmes resumed pacing, his silhouette stark against the flickering light. The red herring is unraveled, Watson, but the true path is narrow. Mrs. Morton's accomplice, the cloaked figure, remains at large. The ring's crest will lead us to him, and through him, to her. I gazed at the glove, its monogram a silent accusation now debunked. Holmes, this case is a maze. The footman's lie, the planted glove, the crested ring, each turn reveals a new deception. Yet, every deception brings us closer to the truth, Holmes replied, his voice steady. The poisoner's cunning is their weakness, Watson. They weave a web to ensnare us, but we shall cut through it with logic. Rest now, for tomorrow we hunt in earnest. As the fire dwindled, I closed my notebook, the weight of the mystery settling over me. The fog outside was a fitting metaphor for the case, its secrets hidden, but not impenetrable. Holmes's relentless mind was our beacon, and I trusted it would guide us through the shadows to the heart of this deadly plot. Hello and welcome to Mysteries by the Fireside, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. I, Dr. John H. Watson, continue our tale of murder and deception in the fog-bound streets of Victorian London, November 1888. The unraveling of the red herring, the monogrammed glove implicating Sir Charles Vane, had sharpened Sherlock Holmes's focus on Mrs. Clara Morton, whose calculated grief and possible ties to the Haverford family hinted at a deeper motive. Now, as dusk settled over Ashcroft Manor, we returned under the guise of further inquiries, our true purpose to search Mrs. Morton's rooms for evidence that would bind her to the arsenic and the cloaked figure. The manor's grandeur seemed to pulse with secrets, its shadows whispering of betrayal as the fog pressed against the windows. The evening was chill, the fog a dense veil that muffled the clatter of our hansom. Quieter, its silence broken only by the distant murmur of voices from the dining hall. Mrs. Morton's rooms were a suite of elegant chambers, their decor a blend of feminine delicacy and understated opulence. Silk drapes, a rosewood writing desk, and a velvet chaise longue bathed in the soft glow of a single gas lamp. Yet the air held a tension, as though the room itself guarded secrets. Holmes moved with the precision of a predator, his long fingers probing the desk's drawers and shelves. "Watson," he said, his voice a murmur, "search the wardrobe and dressing table. Look for anything out of place, a vial, a letter,
A trace of chemical residue. The poisoner's hand is careful, but no one is flawless. I nodded, my heart quickening as I opened the wardrobe, its doors creaking softly. Inside hung an array of gowns, their silks and velvets whispering of wealth, but nothing seemed amiss. I checked the pockets of a fur-lined cloak, finding only a handkerchief and a stray hairpin. The dressing table yielded powders and perfumes, their scents mingling with the room's stillness, but no vials or suspicious substances. Holmes, meanwhile, had turned his attention to the writing desk, his magnifying lens glinting as he examined its surface. "Observe, Watson," he said, pointing to a faint scratch near the edge. "This desk has been tampered with, a hidden compartment, perhaps." He pressed the wood gently, his fingers tracing its contours until a soft click echoed in the quiet. A small panel sprang open, revealing a narrow cavity within. Inside lay a bundle of letters tied with a black ribbon and a small leather notebook. Holmes's eyes lit with triumph as he extracted them, his movements deliberate. "The poisoner's mask begins to slip," he murmured, untying the ribbon and spreading the letters on the desk. The letters were written in a cramped, angular hand, their ink faded but legible. Holmes scanned the first, his brow furrowing. "These are from a Mr. Edmund Haverford, dated 6 months ago. He writes of debts owed by Mrs. Morton's late husband, debts tied to Lord Ashcroft's business ventures. Listen to this, Watson. Your husband's ruin has left you vulnerable, Clara." "Powder," I whispered. "Arsenic, disguised as a medicinal compound?" "Precisely," Holmes said, his voice low but intense. "Mrs. Morton, desperate to escape her husband's debts, conspired with Haverford. He supplied the arsenic and she administered it during Miss Harrow's orchestrated spill. The notebook may confirm it." He opened the leather book, its pages filled with Mrs. Morton's elegant script. It detailed her husband's financial ruin, Ashcroft's refusal to forgive the debts, and her growing desperation. One entry, dated a week before the banquet, read, "E.H. promises salvation. A single act, and I am free. The port will be his undoing." Holmes closed the notebook, his expression grim. "The evidence is damning, Watson, but not complete. We need the vial or the means of delivery to seal her guilt. Haverford's role as the cloaked figure is clear. He procured the arsenic and bribed James to frame Sir Charles. But Mrs. Morton's hand held the poison. I searched the desk's remaining drawers, finding only stationery and a silver pen. Holmes, if she used a vial, she may have disposed of it, or hidden it elsewhere." He nodded, his gaze sweeping the room. "Check the fireplace, Watson. A careless criminal often burns evidence, but ashes betray secrets." I knelt by the hearth, where a faint pile of ashes lay beneath a fresh log. Using a poker, I sifted through the debris, my fingers brushing against something hard, a small glass vial, its surface smudged with soot. I held it up, its contents gone, but a faint metallic odor lingering. "Holmes, could this be it?" He took the vial, examining it under his lens. "A trace of powder remains, likely arsenic, stabilized with a copper compound, matching the tablecloth stain." "Well done, Watson. This was likely concealed in her sleeve, emptied into Ashcroft's glass during the commotion." I marveled at his deduction, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. So Mrs. Morton, aided by Haverford, poisoned Lord Ashcroft to erase her debts. The spilled wine was no accident. Miss Harrow was manipulated or complicit. Holmes shook his head. "Miss Harrow—"
"Mr. Holmes?" "Enough to bring us close to the truth," Holmes replied, his tone reassuring but guarded. "Ensure Mrs. Morton remains unaware of our search. We shall return tomorrow evening to conclude this matter." The cab ride back to Baker Street was quiet, the fog a heavy curtain around us. Holmes sat in thought, his fingers tracing the vial in his pocket. I reviewed my notes, the letter's words etched in my mind. Debts, poison, betrayal. Mrs. Morton's delicate facade had crumbled, revealing a calculating heart. At 2:20:21b, the fire's warmth did little to dispel the chill of the case. Holmes lit his pipe, the smoke curling like the fog outside. "Watson," he said, "Mrs. Morton's desperation drove her to murder, but Haverford's cunning wove the web. The crested ring, the arsenic, the bribed footman all point to a conspiracy. Tomorrow, we confront her, but Haverford remains at large. We must tread carefully." I gazed out at the fog, the gas lamps' faint beacons in the mist. The hidden correspondence had unveiled the poisoner's plan, but the final act awaited, and I trusted Holmes's logic to bring it to a close. Chapter 9. The Confrontation. And welcome to Mysteries by the Fireside, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. I, Dr. John H. Watson, continue our tale. While in her rooms, had unveiled a chilling conspiracy behind Lord Henry Ashcroft's poisoning. Armed with evidence of her collusion with Edmund Haverford, Sherlock Holmes now orchestrated a final act to expose her guilt. As evening descended upon Ashcroft Manor, we returned to the banquet hall, its opulent shadows a fitting stage for a confrontation that would unmask a murderer. The fog had thickened once more, cloaking the manor's stone facade in a spectral veil, the gas lamps along the drive flickering like ghosts in the mist. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of wax and old wealth, the chandeliers casting the head, where Lord Ashcroft's chair loomed empty, his lean figure framed by the chandelier's light. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice calm but resonant, "we are here to lay bare the truth of Lord Ashcroft's murder. A glass of port, poisoned with arsenic, ended his life, yet spared all others. The hand that delivered that poison is in this room, and tonight we shall name it." A murmur rippled through the guests, their eyes flickering with unease. Mrs. Morton's lips parted, but she said nothing, her gaze fixed on Holmes with a mixture of dread and defiance. I stood by the door, my notebook ready, my heart pounding with the anticipation of the trap about to be sprung. Holmes turned to Mr. Thorne, his eyes piercing. "Mr. Thorne, your financial disputes with Lord Ashcroft were no secret. His ventures threatened your stability, did they not? A man in such straits might see murder as a solution." Thorne's face reddened, his fists clenching. "How dare you, sir? I had disagreements with Henry, but I am no murderer. My fortune was tied to his. His death has only worsened my position." Holmes nodded, his expression inscrutable, and turned to Lady Beatrice. "And you, Lady Beatrice, quarrelled over the family estate. A share of the Ashcroft wealth would secure your future. Were you not seated beside him, close enough to tamper with his glass?" Her eyes flashed with indignation. "This is outrageous! I loved my cousin, despite our differences. I would never stoop to such a vile act." Holmes's gaze shifted to Sir Charles, who gripped his cane tightly. "Sir Charles, your agitation that night was noted by all. A diplomatic scandal, perhaps, drove you to desperation. The glove bearing your initial, found in Whitechapel, suggests guilt." Sir Charles rose, his voice trembling with anger. "A glove? Preposterous! I have no such glove, and I had no cause to harm Henry. My troubles are diplomatic, not murderous." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Holmes paused. Guests stirred, their eyes fixed on Mrs. Morton. Her composure cracked, her face paling as she clutched the table's edge. That is a private letter, stolen from my desk. You have no right." "No right?" Holmes interrupted, his voice rising. "A man is dead, madam, poisoned by arsenic from a vial hidden in your fireplace. The residue matches the copper-stabilized compound found on the tablecloth. You conspired with Haverford, who supplied the poison and bribed the footman, James, to frame Sir Charles Vane." James, standing by the sideboard, flinched, his face ashen. Mrs. Morton's eyes darted to him, then back to Holmes, her breath quickening. "This is absurd," she said, her voice trembling. "I am a widow, not a chemist. I know nothing of poisons or conspiracies." Holmes produced the vial, its smudged glass glinting in the chandelier's light. "This vial, found in your hearth, bore traces of arsenic. Your husband's dealings with the Haverford firm gave you access to such compounds. You slipped the poison into Lord Ashcroft's glass during Miss Harrow's spill, which you encouraged to create chaos. Haverford, your accomplice, ensured the arsenic's delivery and planted the glove to mislead us." The room was silent, the guests frozen, their eyes locked on Mrs. Morton. She rose, her handkerchief falling to the floor, her voice rising in desperation. "You cannot prove this. Haverford is a fiction, a name you've conjured. I am innocent." Holmes's gaze was unrelenting. "James," he said, turning to the footman, "tell them what you told us, of the man who bribed you, the cloaked figure with the crested ring." James's voice was barely audible, his eyes fixed on the floor. "It's true, sir. A man paid me to say I saw Sir Charles near the sideboard. He wore a cloak, a ring with a falcon crest. I didn't know it was for murder." Mrs. Morton's composure shattered, her hands trembling as she sank back into her chair. "No," she whispered, "this is a lie. I only wanted to be free." She rose, her shoulders slumped, as the constables took her arms. "Henry trusted you," Miss Ashcroft said, her voice breaking. "How could you betray him?" Mrs. Morton said nothing, her gaze fixed on the floor as she was led away. The guests sat in stunned silence, the weight of the revelation settling over the room like the fog outside. Holmes turned to Miss Ashcroft. "Your brother's murderer has been exposed, but Haverford remains a shadow. We shall pursue him, but for now, justice is served." As we left the banquet hall, the fog seemed to lift slightly, the gas lamps burning brighter in the night. The confrontation had peeled back the final layer of deception, but the specter of Haverford lingered, a loose thread in the tapestry of the case. Hell, Chapter 10. The Final Deduction. Hello and welcome to Mysteries by the Fireside, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. I, Dr. John H. Watson, conclude our tale of murder and deceit in the fog-shrouded streets of Victorian London, November 1888. The dramatic confrontation in Ashcroft Manor's banquet hall had unmasked Mrs. Clara Morton as the poisoner of Lord Henry Ashcroft, her confession wrung from her by Sherlock Holmes's relentless logic. Yet, as we returned to the familiar haven of 221B Baker Street, the specter of her accomplice, Edmund Haverford, lingered like the fog outside. Now, by the fire's glow, Holmes would unravel the final threads of this intricate case, revealing the full scope of the crime and its sobering lessons. The night was clear, a rare reprieve from the fog that had cloaked London for days. The stars glimmered faintly above Baker Street, their light filtering through the window to mingle with the fire's warm glow. Inside, 221B was a sanctuary of clutter and comfort, the air heavy with the scent of tobacco and burning logs. Holmes reclined in his armchair, his pipe sending curls of smoke toward the ceiling, his violin resting on the table beside the monogrammed glove, the coded letters, and the smudged vial, silent relics of the case. I sat at my writing desk, my pen poised to capture his
faint stain on the tablecloth, suggesting a spill during the act. The distraction of Miss Harrow's spilled wine was no accident. It was orchestrated to divert attention, allowing the poison to be slipped into the glass. I scribbled notes, the scene vivid in my mind. The glittering table, the chandelier's ghostly glow, the chaos of the spill. But how did you suspect Mrs. Morton over the others? Thorne, Lady Beatrice, and Sir Charles all had motives. Holmes smiled faintly, a rare glimmer of satisfaction. The guests' secrets were telling, Watson, but their actions betrayed them less than Mrs. Morton's. Thorne's financial disputes were real, but his dependence on Ashcroft's ventures made murder illogical. Lady Beatrice's resentment over the estate was bitter, yet her pride would not stoop to poison, a method too subtle for her temperament. Sir Charles's agitation stemmed from a diplomatic scandal, as I confirmed through my sources at the Foreign Office. His pacing near the sideboard was suspicious, but the glove bearing his initial was too convenient, a planted clue. I recalled the monogrammed glove found in Whitechapel's alleys. The glove was a red herring, then, to frame Sir Charles. Precisely, Holmes said, tapping the glove on the table. Its leather was new, its monogram bold, a theatrical prop dropped by the cloaked figure to reinforce James's bribed testimony. The footman's confession was pivotal, revealing a man with a crested ring who paid him to lie. This pointed to an accomplice, not Sir Charles, whose hands bore no such ring. I leaned forward, the web of clues tightening. And the cloaked figure, Edmund Haverford, tied to Mrs. Morton's husband. Holmes nodded, retrieving the coded letter from the table. Mrs. Morton's motive was rooted in desperation. Her late husband's debts to Ashcroft's business left her ruined, a fact confirmed by the letters in her hidden desk compartment. Haverford, a minor noble with ties to the chemical trade, offered salvation, arsenic, disguised as a medicinal powder, and a plan to eliminate Ashcroft. The coded letter instructed her to use the distraction of the spill, which she encouraged by prompting Miss Harrow's clumsiness.
the manor's service entrance. Holmes's eyes narrowed, his pipe forgotten. Haverford's presence at the service entrance suggests he delivered the arsenic or instructions to Mrs. Morton, possibly observing the banquet's chaos to ensure the plan's success. His crested ring, noted by both Grimsby and James, ties him to the Haverford family, whose falcon and scroll crest I identified in the heraldic tome. He remains at large, a shadow we must yet pursue, but Mrs. Morton's confession seals her guilt. I paused, the weight of the case settling over me. Her confession, Holmes. How did you know she would break under pressure? Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. Mrs. Morton's facade was delicate, Watson. Her tears, her widow's cap, her delicate manners, all were a performance to mask desperation. By confronting her with a letter and vial, I pressed her where she was weakest, her fear of exposure. The accusation against Thorne was a feint, designed to unsettle her. When I revealed the evidence, her composure crumbled, as I knew it would. I gazed at the fire, its flames reflecting the clarity Holmes had brought to the case. And the moral, Holmes? Every case of yours seems to carry a lesson. He leaned back, his expression thoughtful, the pipe smoke curling like a veil. This case, Watson, is a cautionary tale of greed. Mrs. Morton, driven by the weight of her husband's debts, saw murder as her salvation. Yet her ambition blinded her to the inevitability of truth. Greed, unchecked, leads to ruin, as surely as arsenic leads to death. Lord Ashcroft's trust was his undoing. But it was Mrs. Morton's desperation that wove her downfall. I nodded, struck by the somber truth. And Haverford? Will he escape justice? Holmes's eyes glinted with resolve. Not for long, Watson. I have alerted Inspector Lestrade to his description and the crest. The net is closing, though the fog may delay it. For now, Miss Ashcroft has justice for her brother, and that is no power of deduction.